The level of evil humans can do to each other is shocking. You'll almost not believe me after hearing this, but rest assured it is all true. The darkness that go on in some people's mind is great, and the wickedness that comes out of it also. Please guard your heart against any form of hatred as you hear this, because the goal is to show the genuineness of Christian faith despite the level of persecution and suffering, and not promote hatred. The night my husband almost burnt me alive was the first night I ever heard the voice of Jesus. Before this story begins, I want you to know something. Names have been removed from this account. The person whose story this is still lives in a world where a name can mean danger. For security concerns and deeply personal reasons, no names will appear here. But every detail you are about to read is real. And if you are watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment below and tell me where you are from. Let us build a family here. Pray for one another and remind each other that no one walks this road alone. I was 37 years old the night my husband tried to burn me alive inside my own home. And the strangest part, the part that still shakes me when I think about it, is that I smelled the smoke before I felt the fire. I heard a voice before I understood I was dying. That voice did not belong to any neighbor, any relative, or any person standing in that burning room. And that voice changed the entire direction of my life. I am a woman. I was born into a family where faith was not simply believed. It was the very air that filled every room, every conversation, every silence. My father was a man respected deeply in our community. From the time I could walk, I was taught that a good daughter obeys, stays quiet, and never questions what she has been told. By the time I reached my early 20s, my life had already been arranged for me. I was married to a man nearly 15 years older, a religious leader who carried great honor in public, and something very different behind closed doors. To those outside our home, he appeared to be a man of peace. People removed their shoes before greeting him. Women lowered their voices when he passed. But inside the walls he controlled, the atmosphere was heavy and tight, like a room with no windows. Rules surrounded every part of my life. How I dressed when I left the house, whom I could speak to, even how I laughed. He once told me that a woman must always remember her dignity, and the way he said it made dignity feel less like a gift and more like a cage. For years, I obeyed. I kept quiet. I told myself that peace would grow with time, the way the older women in my family always promised it would. But it never came. Instead, something else grew, a quiet restlessness I could not name or explain. The first ray of all crack appeared on an afternoon I have never been able to forget. A young woman from our neighborhood came to my husband sobbing, asking for help because her own husband was hurting her. I stood in the kitchen listening, expecting him to offer comfort, maybe even protection. Instead, I heard him tell her in a calm, firm voice that a good wife focuses on patience, and that she should not bring shame upon her family by speaking publicly about private matters. I watched her leave the house with her shoulders shaking and her crying reduced to nothing. Something inside me broke open that day. I kept asking myself a question I was too afraid to say aloud. If faith was supposed to bring mercy, why did so many people around me look broken instead of healed? I buried that question for months. Then one night, while the house was completely silent and my husband slept, I picked up my phone and began searching the internet. My hands were trembling as I typed words I had been afraid to think. Questions about why people dream of Jesus. I expected to find propaganda or nonsense. Instead, I found testimonies from people who sounded exactly like me. People who had grown up in strict religious households. People whose hearts had been quietly searching for something they could not name. I read one story that kept me awake until dawn. Then another. Then another. Eventually, I came across a Bible application, and with hands shaking as though I were committing a crime, I downloaded it. I opened it slowly, listening for any sound in the hallway. The passage that appeared on the screen spoke about coming to Jesus when you are weary and burdened and receiving rest. I read those words again and again. Rest. The word reached somewhere deep and exhausted inside me that I had not known existed. Over the following nights, I kept returning to the app in secret, lowering the screen brightness so no light would escape under the door. Then I prayed the most frightened prayer of my life, whispering into the dark that if Jesus was truly real, I needed him to show me the truth. 3 nights later, the dream came. I was standing alone in a dark, empty field with no stars in the sky. The air felt heavy. Suddenly, fire appeared in every direction around me, spreading across the ground, closing in and cutting off every path of escape. I could feel the heat pressing against me as I cried out for help. Then, in the center of the flames, a light appeared that was far brighter than the fire itself, but it did not burn my eyes. It was warm and calm in a way I had never experienced. A figure stood within that light. I could not see every feature clearly, but I could see his eyes. They were steady and full of something that felt like the deepest compassion I had ever encountered. He spoke my name, not a general address, not a greeting to the room. My name, as though he had always known me. I asked who he was. He told me not be afraid, and revealed to me that he was the way. The moment those words reached me, the fear in my chest began to dissolve. A peace replaced it that I have no adequate language to describe. I woke up crying, my heart pounding, but calmer than I had ever been in my life. Later that day, I searched those exact words in the Bible app and found them in the Gospel of John, words attributed to Jesus, saying he was the way, the truth, and the life. My hands would not stop shaking. My husband noticed a change in me before I fully understood it myself. He watched me closely at dinner that evening, and something in his eyes shifted. Days later, he entered the living room while I was reading the Bible app and found the verse still open on my screen. The calm expression on his face disappeared instantly. What followed was weeks of suffocating pressure. My family was called together. My parents arrived looking pale and wounded. He spoke to them in measured, cold tones about dangerous ideas entering his home and corrupting his wife. My mother whispered prayers under her breath. My father pressed his hand against his forehead, as though trying to hold himself together. Relatives visited in streams, warning me about shame, punishment, and the consequences of abandoning the beliefs I had been raised with. Some cried, some threatened. All of them carried the same message. Stop immediately, confess your error, and return. The night everything exploded was quiet before it was violent. My husband had spent the entire day moving through the house in tight, rigid silence, and the atmosphere felt brittle like glass about to break. That evening, he stood before me and told me in a voice stripped of all warmth that I would stand before our families and publicly deny everything I had experienced, or face consequences I would regret. I told him quietly that I could not deny what I had witnessed. The dream, the peace, the words of Jesus that had taken root in my heart. These were more real to me now than anything else in my life. He left the house without another word. When he returned nearly an hour later, he was different. His face was tight with rage and with something that looked like humiliation. He began shouting accusations about betrayal, about dishonor, about the shame my curiosity had poured over everything he'd spent his life building. I tried to speak, but my words only poured fuel into him. Then he walked to the storage area beside the kitchen. When he came back into the room holding the fuel container we used for outdoor cooking, my mind refused at first to understand what it was seeing. Then the smell hit me, and understanding arrived like a physical blow to my stomach. He was shouting about burning away the disgrace I had brought into his house. The liquid splashed across the floor and onto my clothing before I could move far enough away. I was begging him, pressing myself against the wall, my voice breaking apart with fear. He was beyond hearing. The fire caught quickly. I remember the flames rising, the heat crashing into my face, the smoke thickening in my throat until breathing became impossible. I remember falling. I remember thinking it was over, but in that moment, surrounded by the exact image of my dream, standing in fire with nowhere left to run, I heard his voice again, not from outside the room, from somewhere deeper than sound. He told me not to be afraid, just as he had in the dream. With the last breath my lungs could hold, I whispered a prayer through the smoke, a simple, desperate call for help directed at Jesus. Then the darkness took me. I woke in a hospital bed, wrapped in bandages, with pain burning beneath every inch of my skin. Neighbors had broken the door down and pulled me from the flames in time. Doctors told me I was miraculously lucky, but I knew what had happened in that room with certainty that no medical explanation could fully account for. In the stillness of that hospital room, while my body slowly began to heal, I made a decision. I would follow the one who had shown himself to me in the fire. I would no longer live in hiding. The rejection that followed was its own kind of fire. My family withdrew. The community that had known me for years treated me as though I had ceased to exist. My marriage was over. Everything familiar collapsed at once. But underneath the loss, I found freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind that comes from having no rules, but the kind that comes from no longer being afraid of the truth. I connected with other believers, first online, then in small private gatherings. I learned what it meant to be forgiven, and then I learned what it meant to forgive, not to excuse what had been done to me, but to release the weight of it from my own chest. Every scar on my body reminds me not of shame, but the night fire tried to take my life, and could not. To every Christian reading or watching this, please pray for those who are persecuted for their faith today. Pray for those who live in silence, in fear, in hiding. Their courage deserves your intercession. And if you are searching tonight, if your heart is carrying questions you're afraid to ask, you can pray simply. Tell Jesus you believe he died for your sins, that you receive his forgiveness, and that you give him your life from this day forward. That is enough. He hears you. Please share the story. Like, comment, and subscribe so more testimonies like this can reach people who need hope. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Let's be a family that prays for each other.